Hello, Shelly.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
We're on the tops and flops, or the cash and the
The
trash, and this is where the
trash.
cash is. We did a
Mhm.
good amount of trashing,
We
I'd
did.
say.
We trash hard.
I don't know if it was, too spicy, but there was a little bit of spice. It was spiced just right. The 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 lickings were tasted just right. I don't know. Mixing
And
metaphors.
we paid for it with cash, with the good stuff.
Yes, yes.
Has to be a balance out there.
And are we doing the favorite fave thought about the most and classic thing again?
We can.
Yeah, okay. I think I have a real
Oh,
classic as well. Like not
nah.
not one where
I
I'm
don't
like,
believe you.
well, it's not like ancient, but it's like considered a Canadian classic.
How old is it? Is it older than you?
Oh yeah, it's older than me for no, I think so.
Oh,
I'm pretty sure it's older than me.
ho, ho, ho.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yes.
I'm
So
shook.
there.
I mean, the last time you had a real classic
A
was when we.
car a car that is 20 years old is considered a classic, you know?
I know Ted brought that up. Ted brought that up recently. That is not how
Uh-huh.
literature works, but so I appreciate that. But I am shook. I'm shook to my core that you have a real classic. The last time you had a real classic was with Jane Austen July 2022.
That's
Okay,
it.
not
There's
yes.
probably been more.
No, no, no way. No way.
I think I think that's untrue.
I think you read classics, but they haven't made it because you read like the
Oh,
Brothers K or the
yeah.
K brothers, and
Sucked.
you were like you didn't like it.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, not that I'm keeping track or anything.
Spicy opinion, because that book is considered like the best book in literature or whatever.
I don't want to read it personally. No.
What do you want to start with?
The book I thought about the most, I guess, because that's how we start, no?
Sure. Sure. You want to start?
Well, the book I thought about the most, as always, is also my favorite fave. So we're going
Oh.
to do the book that I thought about second most,
Oh, okay.
which we read together.
Oh,
Do you remember?
I will when you tell me.
Mother's Milk by Edward St. Auburn.
Oh, I like that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason why I thought about it the most is because very early on I realized that he was talking about a theory that Jean-Jacques Rousseau developed about
Mhm.
language, which went on and on and on
It
and
was
on
interesting.
with you about it. But basically, it's in sort of layman's terms, or it's the fact that like there is a experience that we all have in infancy where we are living our lives that is not filtered through language; it's just through experiences, and that experience is sort of like the purest form of an experience because we're not filter there is no filter, and as we grow we thus filter everything through language and need language to describe our experiences. And so it's kind of the Edward St. Auburn basically takes this Jean-Jacques Rousseau um theory, and he takes it and he like thinks about it in a bunch of different ways, like what does it mean when you have language but then are losing it because you've gotten older, and when language fails us. And but yeah, basically I kind of figured out what he was doing, and then he had the main character reading something by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and I was like, I knew it. I knew it. And I know, but then it made me feel so good because I had learned about this theory 15 years ago, 15 years ago, and I could still like name it all. And I was like, that's, I don't know. So I felt kind of smug about myself, but it also made me think like, and it made me revisit. I don't know. I just felt really good. Okay. Like I just
Really
felt really good.
smart. Yes.
Yeah, I did. I did. I was like, I know what you're doing, and like I love it. And I also love I love the thoughts like behind like I love when somebody thinks deeply about language, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau was someone who did that. So I kind of was like, I see what you're doing, and I'm
Yeah.
feeling it because I like that kind of stuff really interests me as well.
The whole series is really like um compelling, and also like consuming them all because they're cyclical as well. Like we're at
Hmm.
the point in this one where he's old enough to be a father now. His
Oh,
mother
right.
is quite old. He has a son, and he is
Hmm.
like in a cyclical nature, stuck in these certain patterns that his father was in as well, slightly differently, but still, yeah, like worried about these problems to the point of like actually having stress and anxiety dreams about them concurrently, but then still not able to engage with them enough to get out of the patterns. And yeah, in engaging in the same sort of destructive habits, basically.
Right.
Though though a little bit newly formed. And so once again, we find him like in a glow up and then glow down type situation where you're like, oh, I really like Patrick in this way, and then he's being a jerk again. He's
Yeah.
once again in the cycle of destruction, you know? So
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I think that the concept of a series in which you're following him at different points in his life, like you're just checking in with like this character and you've seen the way that they've grown and they're stuck in a pattern. And but I like this idea that you're kind of checking in with him after long gaps. I think that works really well with
yeah,
what he's doing. I don't think, but it also sometimes, for me at least, has rendered a little bit of an uneven reading experience because I think some of the books are stronger than others. But this one in particular, I was like, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I love it. I think it's really interesting. And yeah, and so for me, it was almost about the meta concept or like the overarching themes of language and what it means in our lives than it was about checking in with Patrick. And that was the first time that that really happened in this series because every time before I've like kind of developed like a like I feel caring, I feel like a motherliness towards Patrick, and I want him to do well. And this was like it superseded that feeling to something
mhm.
else, you know, to me, like actually interested in what St. Auburn had to say about language and like what he was thinking about it and
Yeah,
all
I
that.
think that aspect is much more innovative than the regular stuff, but it
Yeah,
is satisfying to see that amount of self-reflection that isn't debased within the text itself. Like Patrick is not
right.
aware of this cycle, only we
No,
are. So
right.
yeah.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good series.
One more
What
book
about
to go,
you?
right?
One more book, yeah.
For me, the one I thought about the most was a Supergirl book.
Oh,
Woman
nice.
of Tomorrow. So I wasn't really prepared to think much of this book, to be honest, because it's
Sure.
a Supergirl story. And I thought, I might get some fun out of it, but it is written by Tom King, who is, I don't know, kind of a literary god to me now, basically. Like, it's insane. I don't think I've read anything by him that has stunk, and his high points are just wildly, incredibly good. Like, when I was looking through my Goodreads this month, I could have selected 3 books of his to be in the top
Oh,
books. And that's just
huh.
wild. So this actually got optioned and will be the next Supergirl movie made by James Gunn as well, which is amazing
Oh,
because it's
yeah.
very sci-fi in a traditional sense. She is divorced completely from like the other superheroes. She's on different planets, and basically she is this story is told by somebody who is human and has met her and formed a friendship with her, and it's their entire sort of life story together as friends, like 2 female companions on
Oh,
this binding journey. She is looking for a person who murdered her father, so there's this like underlying theme of vengeance that clashes with Supergirl, who is very much against that concept. Like, she's all for justice, but not in like recompense in the form of killing the
mm,
person that did the damage, basically.
right.
And so there's like wholesome female companions, but at odds, and yet on the same track as well, looking for this person for 2 different reasons. And then
Oh,
it's also just weird sci-fi, like different creatures, different planets, different conflicts that she has to enter in, which is difficult to come up with because she is essentially invincible, just like Superman. So the conflicts that you have to come up with, especially if they're physical, have to be meaningful stakes in some way. And he does an amazing job of doing that. But yeah, the narrator of this female companion telling the story as she sees it and the underlying themes of Supergirl as she sees it is what really makes this. And it was a perfect story. Like it could not have gotten better. It blew my mind, and the artwork is just incredible. Everything about
That's
it is
cool.
perfect. Like it's just, yeah, it's one of the best comics I've ever read. Like it's up there with Sandman
Wow.
kind of deal. And
Well, I want to read it now.
yeah, it's just, yeah, it was just so good.
Classic. I actually have a classic.
Of course, you,
I know.
you usually do.
Yeah, I'm surprised that I do, that I usually do. I don't know, that surprises me. I wasn't always this reader. So the the classic that I loved, it was called The Jewel in the Crown by Paul Scott. It was written in the 1960s and it's set in the 1940s, pre-partition, but the years leading up to partition. Um, and essentially, at the very beginning, you find out that there is political unrest that is playing out in India in with violence. And there are British people living in India, as they're part of, living as colonizers. And so it's so strange because, like, on the one hand, I feel like Paul Scott really wanted to talk about what it's like to live in India as a British person and experience the power of being like the colonizer to this country, to the Indian people. And he wanted to talk about race, but he sort of cloaks it in this beautiful love story that he ends up like writing really well. And that was really interesting, even though like his most interesting commentary was talking about the racism that existed and the politics of the time. And he just does a phenomenal, because the book is written in like interviews and letters, and it has all this like sort of textual stuff, and every character is like kind of weird. Like they're weird, um and they're richly layered, and sometimes he can kind of go off on like a little bit of a tangent, and like the character can, and you're sort of like, I don't know what this is about, but it always sort of ends with adding a lot to the story. He makes you work for it as the reader. And so his whole thing was like, I felt like I was reading something sort of by Hilary Mantel, or at that level where it's a little bit like you have to sort of massage it a little to get it, to like get what he's trying to say. And the characters are so odd and it's just so layered and interesting. But I thought what was great about it was that I could tell that you could just tell that he wanted to have this conversation about India and race and the way we treat others and all of that. But there was still a super great love story playing like underneath it all. And that I was really like rooting for. And by the end of it, I was like really rooting for it. And I was like, I want to know what happened. Want to know.
Is
And
it
it was
is
really
it
good.
considered like a romance novel or
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, it's considered, yeah, I mean, it's a historical fiction.
romance?
I don't know if it's like romance,
Uh,
because it's like, it is a love story, but at the very beginning, it's like, this is the story of a rape. And you're like,
uh,
oh, okay. So, and then you're like, it's unsure of how this couple kind of became a couple, or even if they are a couple, and also how this rape happened. You're constantly wondering and being like fed little details about like what happened. And so you're kind of like, as a reader, you keep going. But then even as you keep going, you realize sort of the bigger picture is that what he wanted to talk about was like India and like
mm,
what it meant. And like, and he spent some time there as a writer. As a person, Paul Scott spent time there. And so he's like writing about it from sort of that person being able to know and like being in it and all that. It was
mm,
great. It was really
mm.
good. It was really interesting. Yeah. And it's a quartet called the Raj Quartet.
Truly a jewel.
Yes. And like
Cool.
that even has significance. Yeah, it was really good. It was really good. Yeah.
Well, my ostensible classic. I I
Mm-hmm.
think it's considered a Canadian classic for sure. The Manticore, the second in the Deptford trilogy by Robertson Davies, is a, yeah, like whenever people bring up Canadian literature, generally this pops up. One of the three books, usually the first one, probably. But I had read the first book years and years ago, and I thought it was pretty
Hmm.
good, but it didn't like blow me away in the way that like a lot of these lists will tell you that it's like the best book you'll ever read type deal. This one I thought was even more interesting, but it doesn't get that many good reviews, so it was strange. It's about a
Hmm.
man who is coming from pretty good money. He's a lawyer. He ostensibly doesn't have any reasons to dislike his life, but it's set from the perspective of him going to a Jungian therapist, a woman, and getting diagnosed by her. And it
Hmm.
that is just interesting to me in itself because it's obviously like well researched, and it's unreliable in the sense that he is telling the story, but the analyst is obviously perceiving much more than he is when he's conveying the same story to you. And so you
Oh,
get recontextualized information,
yeah.
and the insights are sort of like almost like you're being diagnosed as well because it's from the perspective of that person. So you're kind of like, oh yeah, this just means that he's just not well adjusted, and she'll just be like, bam, this is what it means, and you're like, whoa, didn't see that coming.
Right.
And yeah, it gets like very layered where he is doing the like typical thing where he's obfuscating things to try to like make her perceive him in a certain light, and she's having to peel those back basically. And so yeah, for a book that probably has like half of it in dialogue just between him and his analyst, it's like completely gripping and very interesting.
Hmm.
But then his actual story, there's just something about like historical fiction actually set in Canada that's just interesting to me because not much of it exists, especially in the sense where they actually did lots of like um, research to convey the actual times and stuff like that. Like he is considered quite rich for having $100,000, for instance, during his time period. And so I'm just like, I mean, that's still a great monthly income, you know?
Yeah.
But then, yeah, just the ways in which society work, and then the ways that he perceives his life to have gone, and what the actual obstacles were when what they actually are and stuff. It's just, yeah, very interesting. And then I had no real connection to the persona aspect of Jungian theory,
Hmm.
and this was very much like about that. Like she ascribes the certain persona roles to each figure as he kind of like tells her about the life that she was living. And yeah, it was just really fascinating to know about that because I actually have played a game called Persona and didn't even know it was about Jungian theory or anything like
Yeah.
that. So
Right. Right. Right.
mhm.
Hmm. Was it as good as the first book?
Why it must be because the first one, yeah, like I remember very little of it. I just remember overall thinking it was like pretty good, but didn't blow me away. Whereas this like has some sticking power, like there's
Huh.
very interesting things that I think will be something that I remember
Can
in
you
years
just
to
read it
come.
as a standalone?
Oh yeah, I think so,
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
Like
Okay.
it's
Okay.
it's
Huh.
obviously about like the first book is probably about his father, who you get more context on, but otherwise it's definitely feels like a standalone story.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Well, I'm curious. I'm like, that's why I'm asking all these questions. I'm like, hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for telling me. My favorite fave is one of your favorite faves. Can you
Sounds
guess?
like we have good taste.
Yeah. Can you
I don't
guess?
know.
No? And it's a Canadian book. And
The Blind Assassin.
did not read that this month. You would have known. No, Women Talking
Oh
by
yeah,
Miriam Toes?
Taves.
Taves.
Yeah, you
Well,
wouldn't
I've been
think that looking at the name, but yeah.
Taves, which I mean, I like it's just so good. It's about, and it tells you in the introduction, which makes me feel like it feels like you're spoiling it, but you're really not. In
No.
that these women were drugged, these Mennonite women, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Mennonites?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Mennonite women were drugged and assaulted in their drug state for years by men in their community. And you meet
Multiple
the women,
communities too. Like,
yeah, multiple,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the women, there's a certain group of women are coming together to figure out what to do at this point because the men are away and they're going to come back to be reintroduced to the community ostensibly. And so the women are, some women are having conversations about what to do. And the interesting thing was because of their beliefs, if they don't forgive the men, you know, they're sort of destined to go to hell, which is a really scary thought, you know. And also, you know, it's like, how can you forgive somebody for multiple assaults, you know, on your person and maybe on your children? And there, but the aspect of forgiveness and the deep thought about what is forgiveness and what does that mean, and but then also on top of that, these men and women cannot read or write, and so like the way it's being told with a young man in the community taking notes on their conversations was also just like really good. And then buried in there was like a really sweet love story. And you know, but I mean that was just an aside. It just kind of added like a layer of interest because there were so many interesting points in the book. And even then, it didn't even feel like it was a book with a message with a capital M. It was really like super nuanced and really interesting. And yeah, it
Yeah.
was great.
It's a book that actually goes into each theme that is introduced.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
Oh, yeah,
like makes it so
absolutely.
that it's actually thought provoking and will stick with you. And like, yeah, it is just, yeah, I think it would be a modern classic. I think it's
I
so good.
actually, I think, yeah, I think it could stand, I think it really could stand the test of time. And I never think, oh, I'm going to look up this author and watch her interviewed after I read something. I never really think about that because I just want to just read the next book. Like I just want to get to the next into the next story. And there was something about it where I was like, I must know more about Miriam Taves. Like I must know. And I did look up a little bit, and it's still on my mind to like really sink into like who she is as like a writer and where this came from. But it was just so interesting, and it was based on true events. And so, and the story came out of what she imagined, you know, what would kind of follow this traumatic event to the community. And it really is a book about community, and it's about men and women's roles, and it's about forgiveness and your beliefs and challenging those beliefs, and you know what makes you as a person. And yeah, it was so interesting. It was so interesting. So
Yep. Yeah.
mhm.
It's a fantastic book. It's what got me into Taves too. Yeah.
So what's your favorite fave?
My favorite fave is a graphic novel that I pre-ordered and was
Oh my goodness.
um like delayed, I think a year or something. It's really think of John Wick meets something else. I don't know. It's John
I haven't
Wicky
watched it. I haven't
ish.
watched any John
It's
Wick.
called A Righteous Thirst for Vengeance. And they clearly modeled the person on Benedict Wong, the guy who plays Wong in
Mm.
Doctor Strange, and he's in
Okay.
a lot of different stuff. But it's really compelling because for one, it is kind of brain candy, like John Wick, where it's like action sequence after action sequence, but it's
Yeah.
really reasonably and interesting to read because it throws you in medias res into like this strange situation where you don't know if he's the bad guy or the good guy fighting. So
Yeah.
he seems like he'd be the good guy, but there's questionable decisions that he makes
Yeah.
along the way. And so I would say each issue is paced around like a serious conflict that he has to do, but he's not like a trained assassin killer guy. He's like a overweight guy who's just trying to take care of his mother. And then you're like, how are you getting into these situations where
Right.
ostensibly trained assassins are trying to kill this person that he was there to maybe kill himself? And then it just spirals from there.
Oh.
And you're like, so why are you there to try to kill this person? What is happening? Yeah, this book is
It
it's just
looks so
like
beautiful.
a ton of fun. And yeah, the artwork is just incredible. It's very gory and gruesome, I will say, but it's got like an underlying theme about a few different things that are like compelling enough to plot it along, this like action trippiness. And yeah, it's just like a very fast read. Like there's lots of huge paneling, lots of like really luscious illustration design. Like the
Yeah.
actual craft that went into the book is just great. I think this will probably be a movie. Like it seems like something that would have been optioned at publication, and it
Hmm.
literally looks like Benedict Wong. So I have to imagine they want to cast Benedict Wong in the role of this if it gets made into a film. So
It looks like he's matte, like the texture is different on his little character on the
it
cover.
is, yeah.
Okay, because yeah,
Yeah.
you can
See,
see.
like he's yeah. In the dark, you can see like a tint around him.
Oh yeah, yeah, because you can
Yeah,
see like the little glare, and then but on him it's like matted.
yeah,
Yeah, it looks good.
yeah.
That's cool.
It's just
Good
really
touch.
really
The
fun.
color
Like
palette looks cool. It's like all these grays and browns and muted and like desaturated and yeah.
each one has like a theme that it goes through, like a color
Mm.
palette theme.
Oh, that's cool. I like when
Yeah,
books
and
do
the
that.
story just goes places you'll just yeah, it's fun in the way that you're like, I had no idea this was going to happen every single
That's
time.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's so fun.
What
I love
about
that.
you?
Well, that's it because I
Oh,
already started.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, well, thanks for coming on and talking about the
Yeah, thanks for
cash.
having me. Mm.
Yeah, and if you want to know about the trash, in which we do some trashing for sure.
We for sure.
Yeah, for sure
Yeah.
it's happened. It's already happened. It's happening at the
Yeah.
same time because we post these videos at the same time. So at this very moment, trash is waiting for you.
Trash is waiting for you.
Unless
And
I
it's gonna be great.
messed up the sequencing of this, then I'm sorry. But
Doubtful.
yeah.
It would probably be me who messed it up.
Either way, the trash is coming. The trash
Yes.
collector.
Or is here, depending on
Yes, the garbage
this.
people are there for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, see you.
Bye.